We are now live on Facebook. For those of you watching us on Facebook, I'd like to welcome you to the online Gurdjieff group. My name is Allan, and I'm coming from Toronto, Canada. And this is broadcast live on Facebook. So for those of you who may be watching, welcome. And this will also be saved and put up on YouTube, hopefully by the end of the day. A bunch of us are now joining us. Keith, how are things there in sort of the northeast England on the North Sea? How is your work going? Do you have any questions about inner exercises or the nature of your own inner work?
Well, I've been practicing a lot of exercises from your exercises on the Gurdjieff work on YouTube. I've been practicing. I made a list of the ones I've done. I've been doing the morning sitting, which I find very good. Start the day. Gurdjieff compilation.
Okay. Yeah. That's just a master one where I put everything together there in that one. Yeah.
Relaxing the small, medium, and large muscles.
Okay.
Listening to the feelings.
Any observations, any distractions, any issues that rise up? I mean, ultimately, the goal is to take this work out into the world. It's not something that we do behind, the walls of a retreat center. It's something we do in life with our family, with our friends, with what's going on. Any observations there, Keith?
Well, self-observation, studying myself, my own feelings and thoughts, and also being more mindful of the people when I'm speaking to them, how they're feeling and how they're thinking, and more attentive to listening to them. A great awareness of myself and everything, really. The environment, interacting with other people.
Yeah, no, that's good. Being aware of other people, being, focused on them while aware of yourself is, at a sense, the essence of external considering. Noticing them and noticing yourself and how your behavior, your words, everything that you do influences them. And then trying to influence them in a positive way to make their lives a bit easier. Also, something I posted on Facebook this week, one of the quotes of Mr. Gurdjieff, was he talked about learning to play a role in life, to be an actor. And he said the role that we should play is the role of ourself. And no one should know that we're playing the role of ourself, but that's creating an inward separation. That's stepping us back into that state of non-identification. So, and then he gets a little even more specific. For instance, with your mother, you should be very helpful to your mother because she is the source of your arising, or your father. And you should play the consummate role of the son to them. To your children, you should play the consummate role of father or mother to them. Recognizing that how we interact and what people see on the surface is just our personality, and beginning to move the control back inwards into ourselves. So it sounds like you're doing some of that. And with friends, you play the role of Keith, and you don't want them to notice anything different. You want them to just see the same old person they saw, but you're operating from a deeper perspective. You're operating from that where you've separated yourself from yourself, and recognizing that the way you appear in the world is really more like playing a role. Karen, how are things? I'm going to turn your microphone on. Let me see if I can. No, I think you have to unmute it on your end. Yeah. How are things in Mexico? How's the inner work going?
Going pretty well, Allan. I've invented this exercise for myself where now that it's winter and it's cold, we don't have heat. The mornings are very cold and the evenings can get pretty cold. So I get a chill, and I feel this chill coming, and the exercise is to stop it before it even chills. So it's been an interesting thing because I don't do a lot of things physically, and so it's giving me a window into controlling things.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by stop it before?
Well, I'll feel this chill coming on me, like I will get a tremble, and before the tremble fully develops, I stop it.
Okay, that's what I'm interested in. How do you stop it? Do you put a coat on, or do you stop it
No,
internally?
it's all physical stopping, and combining, thinking about it and getting my body more prepared, and then it doesn't happen.
Okay, so getting your body more prepared, are you talking about putting on layers, or?
No, nothing to do with anything like that. It's
Okay.
totally a psychic thing.
Okay.
Where I just control the onset of the shiver.
And you stop it?
Yeah.
Where does it start?
I don't know. That's what I want to know.
Okay.
Because that's why I feel like if I'm stopping it, I can get more time to look at the procedure of it happening.
When my son was 12 or 13, I told him about Buddhist monks who could go out in the snow and melt the snow around them. And it became his idea fixe for a while to be able to go out in shorts and a t-shirt. And he got very successful at it. Everyone else would be bundled up, and he would be out in t-shirts and not really having an issue with it. And I asked him, what were some of the things he did? And he said he couldn't really describe it. But in the core of his being, in the solar plexus, if he could make something vibrate and shimmer and move and whatever, it kept him warm. And so it required him to, and this is the explanation he gave me when he was like 17, 18, 19, not when he tried to do it earlier on. But so he would be outside and it would be close to freezing. He would be in a t-shirt. Everyone else would be bundled up, and he would be holding his attention on something in his core and just making it vibrate, shimmer, move. And he found that that was the key to warming himself up. He also had other keys. He said, before you go outside, make sure you go to the toilet, because we waste a lot of body heat on keeping our urine warm. And so if you go to the toilet, you're not keeping that warm. And then he would also say that, he would make sure when he was sort of in the house before he went out, that he would let himself get as warm as he could to take that warmth out with him. So he was doing those three things. But he noticed it, he described it, and where he was pointing from was about the navel to the solar plexus. And he was talking about inward there, finding something and trying to get it to vibrate, get it to oscillate. And by doing that, he warmed himself up. I don't know if you'll ever be able to find that, but it's something worth looking into.
Yeah, I'll try that, Allan.
Yeah, see if you can find that inner place. Yeah.
Okay.
Ian, how are you doing? How are things in Portland, Oregon? Nice and early there.
Nice and early. Wet and cold.
Wet and cold.
Yeah.
I
guess I'm doing okay. I've been doing a lot of driving. I do food delivery driving, and noticed, especially yesterday, I just had a lot of irritation going. Not so much. Excuse me. We've talked in the past about the lose it emotions, where the road rage and angry, and it's not anywhere near that strong, but it's just kind of like spiky irritation and resentment at other people for doing stupid things. And I can feel it build up in my system. Because last week we had talked about noticing ways we leak energy, or, if we talk to ourselves when there's nobody around, stuff like that. So I noticed when I feel that sort of static buildup, if I talk to myself, or from like, oh, you fucking idiots, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? Things along those lines, the charge goes down. And so I thought, well, maybe this is expressing negative emotions. So I tried to not do it, but it would just build up and build up and build up. And, and then I curse somebody out, and I'd feel better, and I'd have an easier time interacting with the people, either I was picking the food up from or dropping it off to, like my whole system just kind of settled down and I was more present. So I'm not sure what to make of all that, but it's pretty noticeable.
Well, I mean, just speaking about that, you remind me of Karapet of Tiflis, who, when he got old, they didn't want him working with the heavy jobs on the railway. And I mean, this is a long time ago. And so they gave him the job of going to the train station in the center of the town and ringing the steam whistle in order to wake all the employees, because they didn't have clocks or anything. And he initially just found that he was coming down with all sorts of maladies and illnesses and problems. And then friend of his gave him a book on, spiritual stuff or psycho-spiritual stuff. And so he learned that before he did it, he would go, "Your mother wears army boots, your father," and he would scream and hurtle these insults out and then ring the bell. And in a sense, there was a form of protection to that. And I also think Mr. Gurdjieff was making a meta comment on a lot of his own behavior to people, because he knew people were going to say nasty things about him, turn on him, stab him in the back. And so to get ahead of that, I'm just wondering if you are just picking up on a lot of the negativity of the drivers around you as well. There are academics, their entire academic career is devoted to studying people when they drive. And our egos extend outwards to the edge of the metal of the cars. And because you're hidden in that big hunk of metal, you tend to be more egocentric and more negative expressions and stuff like that. Things you wouldn't perhaps say face to face, because you just turn the corner and you're gone and you don't have to really deal with people. And so in a sense, driving does bring, more of an egocentric, more of a nasty nature out in people. And, I've seen people just sitting on their horns because the person's going slow. The horn is supposed to be, keep away, we're about to get into an accident. It's not a way of yelling at people and screaming at them. So, I mean, could you be feeling their negativity perhaps, or is this more internally generated?
I mean, it could be a combination. If there's something in my life stirring up that kind of static irritation, and then I go out and there's a lot of it in the world, then, my ability to sort of just process it without having to get it back out would be lessened. So it's something I'll have to pay attention to. But I've definitely noticed. Sorry, someone's at the door. I've definitely noticed what you're talking about with the ego, being in the car and feeling like it very much feels like I'm physically able to act out things that are normally buried in the back of my mind. It's like, oh, this space is mine and nobody's here, and so all that stuff has a place to come out. And it's been kind of helpful to think of it that way in terms of like self-observation and learning about myself. Is, oh, these are the things I normally don't let myself take pictures of, and here's a space where I can. So yeah, I'm not sure what all to make of it, but I'm going to keep watching it.
Yeah, right. So I mean, we've been talking about, you and I, this particular aspect for a few years now, and it's a wonderful field for self-observation. I don't have a car. I haven't had a car in 20 years, or not quite 20 years, but 18 years. And I years and years ago, I had a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of personality. I remember back in 1980, the first time my girlfriend, who eventually became my wife, is now my ex-wife, was in the car with me. She couldn't believe it. There I was, this real polite, nice person, suddenly turning into Mr. Hyde and becoming this beast and angry and yelling and all of this stuff. And it was such a disconnect for her. And to see myself through her eyes and suddenly to realize, wow, this is an aspect of myself I wasn't even aware of. I would just get into the car and I would be angry and driving and shaking my fists and swearing and doing things I would not do outside of an automobile. So it was quite interesting, quite an interesting place for self-observation. I'm going to go to Hisham. I think we lost Keith. Hisham, you have had some very interesting work this week. And just before I say that, Brian, I don't know if you can see your screen. We can just see the side of your face and barely, and everything is green. I don't know if
I'm not sure why that is. I was having little computer problems before, but
okay.
I just see green also, so I'm not sure what's going on there.
Maybe you could try your blinds or something. Could it be the sunlight coming in? I'm not sure. I'm going to go to Hisham right now. Hisham, you've talked about some very interesting things, both on our online message group and just before we went live. Can you talk about them now?
Yes, so as I said, this week was really busy for me. I had a lot of work to do at the office, and also I got to attend to German classes 3 times, 3 hours every time week, and also I have to prepare for an examination. It is a lot more work than I have ever done. I think it is. It's not usual for me to do this. So the same time I was trying to do it at least being present in my body, to do it at least to be present in it. But at a certain time I couldn't. So and then some manifestations that I normally can and have worked on and can manage started to show themselves. So just like speaking aimlessly, saying more than usual, and going into details when speaking with others, speaking with passion. And at the same time, when I had these manifestations, I felt myself present. They were happening, but I was present, and I could see them, observe them calmly. At first, I couldn't stop them, but I was there and I was taking notes, and I was taking notes. It's though as if a role was being played, and I wasn't it, I wasn't that, but at the same time I couldn't stop it, and I couldn't possibly change it. So that was it.
Yeah, there are points where Mr. Gurdjieff said that we should only spend 1/3 of our waking hours doing inner work, particularly at the beginning and even in the middle, because we can burn out. So it's okay to give yourself permission to turn off when you don't have the energy. But you did something interesting. This was such fertile grounds, really, for self-observation. Last week I talked about, first is the sort of non-expression of the negative emotions, and then that step towards disidentifying, and then to move the control back inwards into the state of non-identification. And this sounds like the process of disidentifying. You could watch yourself. You weren't able to stop it. You weren't able to stop the chatter, speaking too much, whatever, but there was a part of you that was, in a sense, recording it, observing it. So because of your exams, because of all the things that have been happening to you, you said that last week, or this week was one of the busiest weeks you've had. You just didn't have the normal energy and that normal centeredness. But it really gave you an opportunity to look at those places where you do leak energy. I assume one is that you used to talk a little too much and over-explain yourself. And that was one of the things you mentioned. What were some of the other things that you noticed in terms of, this is how I'm leaking energy?
And this week, this was it's considering people, but not negatively, but it's as if I feel that when somebody comes to me to speak, to have a little chat, I give him all my attention. So I feel obliged to give him my attention. I must give him my attention. So this was also a part of Reiki energy.
Yeah, that actually is a dimension of internal considering. Mr. Gurdjieff said that there are two different forms to internal considering. One is when we think the other person doesn't consider us enough. And the other is, he also, to the women of the rope, I believe it was, he called them the jump up people. Where you try to be too helpful, you want people to think you're great, you want them to think you're wonderful. This was actually one of the things that I had to struggle against, really deferring to other people, sort of being that jump up person and wanting them to like me, please think I'm good. And so I would go out of my way to demonstrate how wonderful I was and how helpful I was. And it was really just based on a need for them to acknowledge me and to think I'm a good person. And it was very hard to distinguish that at the beginning as a form of internal considering, where you're giving too much of yourself. We normally think that that is selflessness, but it's not. It's actually a negative form of internal considering. Any comments?
Well, I can just say that this is a thing that I have been working on, and it's a thing that comes from how I have been raised when I was a child. So I used to do it a lot more than right now in the past, and I sometimes I can even go out of the way just to let other people do whatever they want, and I would feel that wasn't what I wanted to do, but it's something that it is ingrained in me. So it's just like, and I could also feel it in the body, and I have been working on that, and I have been working on the also saying what I mean in the speaking what I have to speak. Because I had a lot of difficulties speaking what I have in mind to people, being shy and letting people have their way. So for me, it was the reverse. I had to become a little to learn to say no and to say what I had to say, even if it displeases the other people. So it was sometimes I tend to the extreme, sometimes I tend to the other extreme, and with the time it's just like I swingle in the between the middle. So I'm trying to find that middle.
Another thing he said about jump up people, in particular this one context, it was some Armenian person who had come to see him. And afterwards he pointed out how the Armenian hid part of the clothing that they were wearing because they were ashamed of appearing with that kind of clothing. And I remember years ago, my girls, I was divorced, they would come over every second weekend. And one weekend they asked if they could dye their hair at my place because their stepfather didn't like that. Too much potential for messiness. And I said yes. And I had this green shirt on, and somehow the dye got on my shirt and it all got bleached. And I remember being on the subway one day and looking at my shirt and suddenly being absolutely horrified that I was out in public with this slight discoloration on my shirt. It just struck me that how silly it was for me to be focused on what I was wearing and think that other people were judging me based on my clothing. So for me, that was a real shock awakening point. I remember then after that, I actually had to go see a meeting with a lawyer, and I made sure that I wore a ripped coat, my worst pair of pants. I wanted to put myself into a situation where I would just feel so uncomfortable that I would have gone out of my way to dress up in a situation like that. And so I made myself dress down, and just to stand there and not be focused on what I'm wearing. So that's just my own personal experience of it. The different ways, there's the positive internal considering, why didn't they look at me? They should have recognized me. And there's the negative. Oh boy, maybe I said the wrong thing. Maybe I hurt their feelings. Maybe I offended them. I want them to be my friend, kind of thing. So we've got to look to see how that manifests within us. Brian, your microphone's off. Let's see if we can turn it on. We can call you the Green Man. We can just barely see your face. Do you have any observations on the inner work that you're doing? How's it going, Green Man?
It's good. And here in a second, I'll try to log off and log back in and see if the green.
Well, no, let's just speak now. So, because you're here.
Sure. So, everything's going good. Again, I've really putting the attention on the body, like throughout the day. It's amazing what that's done, and just I just feel like it gives me a sense of calm, like no matter what the situation is and no matter what I'm doing, just really grounding the attention on the body, doing body scans, and I could be driving in traffic or in any type of situation that normally would have been a little bit irritating, but if I just put the attention on the body, it's just amazing how quickly it kind of seems to calm the system down. And that's another just invaluable thing to be able to do that.
Okay.
Recently, that's my most important thing.
Okay. So let me just pull up on the screen, do a little bit of inner work, recognizing that we work for ourselves, we work for humanity, for mankind, and we work for the earth herself. And Mr. Gurdjieff's prayer, his vow, I wish to be, I can be, I have the right to be, I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. Now, I've actually pointed this out quite a few times in the last 2 weeks, so I'm going to share it. And I normally don't like to bring up a lot of stuff from Tales, because you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And for those who may be watching this who've never read Tales, I don't like to talk too much about it. It's something that you should just dive into, experience yourself. But there's an interesting page on Tales, and it's going to be relevant in terms of the inner exercises that we do. And I'm just going to pull up the page right now. And at this place of my explanations, and this is our dear grandfather Beelzebub talking to his grandson Hussein, at this place of my explanations concerning chiefly the fundamental laws of world creation and world maintenance, it is interesting to notice, by the way, that the three-brained beings of this planet, which has taken your fancy, already began at that period when the consequences of the properties of the organ kunda buffer were not yet crystallized in their common presences, to be aware of these three holy forces, the sacred Triamazikamno, and name them first God the Father, second God the Son, and third God the Holy Ghost. And in various cases express the hidden meaning of them, and also their longing to have a beneficent effect on them for their own individuality by the following prayers. So these are the only, there's another prayer that's called Lord have mercy. These are the only prayers that I've found that Mr. Gurdjieff fully endorses, fully recommends. First one, sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings. Direct your actions upon us. And within this, the divine rejoicings is the affirmative positive, revolts is the negative, and sufferings is the reconciliation. Or wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being. This is probably the most famous one, the wholly affirming one. And the final one is holy God, holy firm, holy immortal. Have mercy on us. And here again, holy God is the affirming, the positive. Holy firm is the denying, the negative. And holy immortal is the reconciliation that reconciles holy God with holy firm. So I'm just going to, and I've got these on the website, the Gurdjieff Group of Toronto. There's a playlist called Exercises in the Gurdjieff Tradition. But I'm just going to play them, the ones that I have recorded already. So the first one is called the 60 Bones Exercise. We actually have 3 bones. Actually, I can't see my screen, just a second. We have 3 bones in our hands, from the knuckle to the top to where it reaches our palm and inside. And the 60 bone exercises, there's 15 bones in each hand and each foot. And there will be an image, it's an X-ray image on the exercise going through it, but it's a way to say a prayer and to focus our attention on the sensation of self. And these prayers came from one of Mr. Gurdjieff's students. His name was Paul Beidler. And these exercises are also found on endlesssearch.co.uk. It's actually run by a Canadian who was in a group in Toronto, and a friend of mine was part of that group. And every 6 weeks they got into a van from Toronto and then drove down to Northern Forest in Pennsylvania and spent an intensive weekend working with Paul Beidler. He would give them handwritten notes. They would come back to Toronto, spend 6 weeks as a group in Toronto working through those notes and everything, and then drive back down there. So these exercises come through that website, and I'm going to play them. And these are, there's going to be a number of them on that I'm going to play. These are found on the Gurdjieff Group of Toronto, the playlist for inner exercises. It will be found, for instance, in the Facebook description of this meeting. And when I post it on YouTube, it will be found on YouTube. And these are things that we should be doing outside of sitting in front of a computer screen. Paul Beidler recommended the 60 bone exercise, working through all 60 bones in the hands and feet, to do this upon waking in the morning when you were still in bed. So I'm just going to hopefully start this. And if there's any problems, just give me a thumbs down if you can't hear anything or whatever.
Wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being. This is the 60 bone exercise. Become aware of all 3 bones in each finger and toe, and repeat a line from the wholly affirming prayer in the following sequence. Wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being. Wholly affirming, wholly denying,
wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being. I just want to make a point. Right hand, left foot, left hand is the sequence. This one is the sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings. Direct your actions upon us. This is actually a moving exercise to do out when you're gardening or walking down the street. And it's becoming aware of various joints in the body. It can also be done sitting, lying down, but it's ultimately designed to be a moving exercise when you're walking down the street or whatever.
Sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us. This is a walking exercise, though it can be done when sitting. Bring your attention to each joint and silently repeat the word. Sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us. Sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us. Sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us.
And this is another exercise, and there are two versions of this. One is the Holy God, Holy Firm, Holy Immortal, have mercy on us. And the other is Holy Affirming, Holy Denying, Holy Reconciling, Transubstantiate in us for our being. And I'm going to play these both versions. They're only about a minute long. These you can do anywhere, sitting, walking.
Holy God, Holy Firm, Holy Immortal, have mercy on us. Say the words, sense your bones, and visualize your marrow illuminating. Practice this exercise when walking, sitting, or lying down. Holy God, Holy, Firm, Holy, Immortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, Holy, Firm, Holy, Immortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, Holy, Firm, Holy, Immortal, have mercy on us. Holy Affirming, Holy Denying, Holy Reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being. Say the words, sense your bones, and visualize your marrow illuminating. Practice this exercise when walking, sitting, or lying down. Holy, affirming, holy, denying, holy, reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being. Holy, affirming, holy, denying, holy, reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being. Holy, affirming, holy, denying, holy, reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being.
Let's just finish with the collected state exercise. As the earth is surrounded by an atmosphere, so too are we surrounded by an atmosphere. Normally our atmosphere gets dispersed. If we think about something that goes in that direction, if we get identified with something, our atmosphere goes towards that. It can also be dispersed through emotions, through sensations. So keep your thoughts, keep your sensations, keep your emotions calm. Keep them quiet. Pull your atmosphere in, collect it, draw it around you, perhaps a meter in length. And in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 to 3. And when I do, breathe your atmosphere into yourself, and as you breathe out, imagine something remains. So collect your atmosphere, gather it around you, keep it still, keep it quiet, keep it tranquil. 1, 2, 3. Breathe it in, and then as you breathe out, imagine something remains. And then silently in your mind, repeat after me. May results from this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being. And last week, this week, I'm doing exercises that are on the Toronto Gurdjieff group YouTube channel. Under inner exercises, there's a whole playlist of them. Do them. Don't sit there and do them, some of those exercises that we just did, as you're watching. As you're walking down the road, bring your awareness to your right wrist and go sources, and then your elbow, right elbow, of, and your right shoulder, divine, left hip, rejoicings, left knee, direct, or rejoicings, revolts, and then left ankle and right ankle sufferings, and work through. So it's up your right arm, down your left leg, up your right leg, and then down your left arm, and circle through. It's winter time. For those who live like I do in Canada or the northern climates, when you're shoveling snow, it's a good exercise to do. If you're in the southern hemisphere and it's summer, when you're gardening, when you're washing the dishes, when you're doing some kind of physical movement that would normally be on automatic pilot, that's a wonderful exercise to do. Not only does it focus on the moving center, not only is it an exercise in directing your attention, it's also a profound prayer, as are the other two prayers. These were the prayers that Mr. Gurdjieff included in Beelzebub's tales to his grandson. So he obviously thought that they were important. And not just that, they're all found on the same page. So he could have spread them out like he did a lot of things, but he put them all on the same page, and I believe he must have done that for a reason. So these are little things that you can practice throughout the day. Paul Beidler said the 60 bone hands and feet exercise. He recommended doing that before you got out of bed in the morning. And if you notice, I went through on those exercises, each one of them 3 times, because we should always do things in threes. So just to, get you thinking along these lines, to perhaps start doing them. Everything that I have on the YouTube channel, I consider training wheels. The ultimate goal is to not have to use the recording to do them. One of the benefits of being able to put them on YouTube is I can write out a very clear script, record it, and maintain a great degree of fidelity. Whereas I've noticed that when I do it live, I don't follow the same script, and sometimes I drift and I have to listen to it again and realize, oh, I forgot that, or I forgot that. Back in the old days, before YouTube, before we had these recording instruments, people would have to keep them in their head. Mr. Gurdjieff would give exercises to various of his students, tell them to go home and write it down, and then to teach it to other students, and then he would ask what they taught, and he would correct it. And they would go through revisions until they got it right. That's the proper way to keep these inner exercises within ourselves, within our mind, but we can always go back and get refreshers. My goal was to maintain a certain degree of fidelity with the exercises that I post online so people can learn to do them properly. But I do not want anyone to get stuck on needing to listen to them online. This is something we should be able to do wherever we are, whatever we're doing. If we have 20 minutes and we sit down in a chair in the morning, if you've done the morning sitting enough, it's easier to follow along with a voice. That's what makes it even more important to do it inside on yourself in silence, to take yourself through all of those points and up in the whole exercise, to start developing will, to start developing the ability to do. So I've talked about this before. I'm going to talk today about astrology and personality tests. This comes from Fritz Peter's book. I believe it was the second book, but it's been now incorporated. His first book was Boyhood with Gurdjieff, and I forget the name of the second book, but now they're in My Journey with the Mystic, with Boyhood with Gurdjieff. Wonderful book. I strongly recommend. One of my favorite books. Fritz Peters, when he was 12 years old, was sent to live at the Prieuré with Mr. Gurdjieff, and he was writing about it 30, 40 years later, recollecting conversations. This is a conversation, and this one, I don't believe this one he heard as a child. I think he heard this one as a young man, so it was more fresh in his mind. And I've titled it, you know, the words in the text, Astrology Had Been a Really Genuine Science. At one time, as part of a general discussion on the deterioration of knowledge and science in the modern world, Gurdjieff brought up the subject of astrology. He claimed that many centuries ago, it had been a really genuine science and very different from the present-day conception of astrology. As an example of the way in which it had been civilized and misinterpreted, he said that the astrological signs were originally invented. Notice that word invented. They're not written in the stars. We invented them and pasted and painted them over the stars. That the astrological signs were originally invented to synthesize the particular characteristics against which a given individual would have to fight or to struggle in the course of life on earth. He said that an individual born under the sign and influence of Aries, the ram, should properly remember that the ram was a symbol of the characteristics of his nature against which he should struggle in order to achieve harmony and balance within himself. Scorpio, in this interpretation, the female kills the male when mating has been accomplished, could generally be interpreted as a killing sign, although he did not mean killing in a physical sense. He went on to point out that Pisces and Gemini were the two obvious dual signs, but that they represented two different kinds of duality. In Pisces, it is warring duality, two fishes tied together, as they are sometimes depicted in old engravings and drawings, but struggling to break the bonds between them. In other words, Pisceans have to struggle against a self-divisive tendency in their own natures. Gemini, on the contrary, represented a merging of duality, and the struggle was against ingrowingness and towards separation. Sagittarius has to struggle against the destructiveness, the arrow aimed at the world, and so on. The straightforward, simple method being to find out what your sign symbolized in your mind and relate it to your natural characteristics. Gurdjieff did not discuss all the signs in detail, but suggested that once one could discover for oneself what the sign symbolized or represented in the way of characteristics or compulsions in oneself, then one would have to remind oneself that such a synthesis represented those elements against which one would have to fight throughout life, what might be called the built-in obstacles in one's own nature that were part of the key to self-perfection or growth, the necessary obstacles standing in the path to development. He added that this was usual in all great ancient sciences. The lesson was never clearly stated, but could only be learned with effort, and that a great part of the problem in astrology was the individual's particular interpretation of the meaning of his sign for himself. Going back to Aries as a convenient example, he said that it was not only that persons born under this sign would have to struggle against their tendency to ram or batter in various circumstances and situations, but that it would also depend upon their interpretation of ramming and their personal analysis and understanding of the ways in which this compulsive characteristic was manifested. The sign, in other words, was a key, an indication for all persons born under it. But since each person differed individually, it would be necessary for them to find out for themselves in what particular ways the sign manifested their individuality. He warned that in the particular individual search and analysis of such characteristics, a clue usually could be found if one was able to observe objectively the characteristics within oneself to which one is inordinately attached. He said that while it was very hard to observe one's personal prejudices and pleasing characteristics with real objectivity, it was nevertheless necessary to do so in order to evaluate oneself correctly. In this, other people could be useful, as through them it was possible to observe the effects upon them of one's own recurring individual manifestations. One way to discover these things within ourselves to which we are attached, which we like, and of which we are proud, although perhaps quite unconsciously, is the frequency of their repetition in outward manifestations, in dealings with other people, such recurrent manifestations could be the first clue to our vanities, which in turn should be interpreted in relation to the characteristics of our astrological sign. In an attempt to give an easily comprehensible hypothetical example, and a very obvious one, he said that if a given individual should observe that in his dealing with other people, he manifested a certain persistent, recurring insistence on having his own way, and that such a person turned out to be someone who was born under the sign of Aries, the implication is fairly obvious. Learn how consciously not to insist. If a Piscean was also insisting in this sense, the insistence might be interpreted as a one-sided insistence, and it might be necessary to learn consciously to insist with the other half of one's nature. If a person born under the sign of Aries can learn not to insist in his dealings with other people, assuming that he has found he does so, he will at least have learned the possibility of not being insistent in his own self-struggles towards growth and development. Any recurring manifestation Any unconscious habit is of necessity a form of blindness, in that the repetitive manifestations by its very operation prevents conscious activity. In relating this rather general conversation to Gurdjieff's work or his method, I could only conclude personally that it is a fairly clear example of his teaching. Fundamentally, the discussion seemed to me to emphasize the need to produce constant struggle within oneself, which generally was the basis of his method. Anything to keep the pot boiling. Anything, including astrology. The simplest guidepost that he gave in this discussion of astrology and the zodiac and the signs of the zodiac was to watch for those things in oneself which one loves, whether they were physical, emotional, or mental manifestations, compulsions, habits, or characteristics. He gave a choice of terms. If you loved your hands as a physical feature, this was a clue of a kind, something to do with the use or function of the hands. If you loved or cherished your propensity for eloquence, this was another clue. If you loved or were proud of the fact that you were always honest, another clue, and so on. Not much in the way of answers, but as he admonished repeatedly, there are no answers except for the ones that one finds for oneself. So I've isolated, these are Fritz Peter's words, the various important components of that text. So the particular characteristic against which an individual would have to fight or to struggle in the course of life on earth. And we do this to achieve harmony and balance within himself or ourself. I'm just going to stop sharing this for a second. One of Mr. Gurdjieff's famous phrases is, every stick always has two ends. And let's just focus on the simple ability to say yes or no. I used to have an incredibly hard time telling people off and saying no. It was a real defect in my character. I was stuck in the position of saying yes. I could tell you stories that people who know me now find a little unusual because I can say no now. I've learned to. So I've learned to be able to swing this freely. So I can say yes and no. I use this metaphor as an example of the constraints and laws that we are under. Mr. Gurdjieff said in World 48, at the realm of the mechanical being, where we are machines ruled by habits and automatons, we are under 48 laws. One of my personal laws was the inability to say no, to always say yes, put myself into situations where I should have said no. And so to develop the ability to say no removed one constraint from me. It removed potentially one of those possible laws. So finding out where we're fixed, where we do not have any freedom, those habitual ways we relate to people and relate to the world, that's a form of slavery. If you can't develop the opposite, you are enslaved to that characteristic. So the first thing we have to do is we have to become aware of that characteristic, and then we actually have to consciously and deliberately oppose it. It's not that I have to say no every time. I would like to, in a situation where where yes is appropriate, to say yes, and where no is appropriate, to say no, rather than be stuck in this habitual way of relating to people. And this goes back to my own personal form of identification. I always thought I had to justify myself, prove my worth to people, add value to whatever I did because I wanted people to like me. I didn't want anyone to think bad about me, so I would go above and beyond the call of duty. And this was so ingrained in my being, but it provided such a fertile field, such fertile ground to work on myself. I owned a natural health care center that I opened in Ottawa in Canada in 1987. I hired a manager named Cheryl, and the number one duty I gave her was to say no. I told her I can't say no to people. I'll say I have to discuss this with Cheryl, and then when I talk to you, you say no. And that's how bad it was with me. I couldn't say no to someone's face. I would say, I'm sorry, she's my business manager. I've got to discuss all these things with her. When inside I was going, no, 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 I don't want to do this. And then I would talk to her and she would go and say no to them. And, that's how trapped I was in that particular characteristic. Fortunately now I've learned how to say no to people. So coming back to this, so harmony and balance, every stick has two ends. We want to be in the middle, between yes and no, or between that ramming of Aries and the non-ramming. So to achieve balance and harmony. What might be called the built-in obstacles in one's own nature that were part of the key to self-perfection or growth. The necessary obstacles standing in the path to development. Mr. Gurdjieff once said that there were 27 different personality types. The world needs all 27 to function. Another of my personality types was that I would overthink things. And this was a characteristic of my family, my brother, my sister. We were the great thinkers, but we wouldn't do because we would be caught up in that overthinking. It was one of the ways, one of our personality types, the ways that we not were broken, but how we came into the world. And therefore, one of our keys to self-perfecting was to just jump off cliffs and do things without over-analyzing them. And everyone has similar traits. They could be maybe you jump off cliffs too much and you don't analyze enough. These inherent qualities within us are the keys to our self-perfecting. They are the obstacles standing in the way of our development. So this is something we have to begin observing within ourselves, to observe objectively the characteristics within oneself to which one is inordinately attached. Again, here I'm a Libran. I was always the one standing between two enemies. I had friends who would say, you can't be his friend and be my friend. And the other friend would say the same. And I would tell both of them, forget it, I'm both of your friends. And I would always be trying to bring them together. I once got in the middle of two friends fighting and I got hit in the head. I was always trying to be the peacemaker. That was my natural default position, the way I was born. And so there are times now I go out and I create animosity, I create friction. It feels so unnatural, so uncomfortable inside myself, but it is a will task. It's a way of freeing myself from those hard, rigid fossilizations deep down in my being and being able to achieve that balance and harmony. So I was inordinately attached to the idea that I was a peacemaker. I used to talk about experiences like getting hit in the head, trying to stop a fight between two very close friends, and being the only friend that these two enemies would allow to have in common. They made everyone else, I'd choose one side or the other. And I was so proud of these. This is who I am. I'm the peacemaker. So now I try and go out and create a little bit of division, a little bit of dissent. I try and be a little more warlike, so to speak, with people to develop the opposite characteristics. It was very hard to observe one's personal prejudices and pleasing characteristics with real objectivity. It was nevertheless necessary to do so in order to evaluate oneself correctly. We generally have the biggest blinders for ourselves are around what Mr. Gurdjieff called our chief fault. But, those things that we love about ourselves, they are big arrows pointing at those areas where we really need to work on ourselves. Do not succumb to Monsieur Self-Love and Madame Vanity. If you think that this is your noble characteristic, step on it a few times. Act opposite to that characteristic. Here, in this, other people could be useful. This is where group work becomes useful. When we are like a machine, when we are transforming that machine-like energy of World 48, one of the characteristics or definitions of a machine is unable to observe itself. So for the real automatic habits within ourselves, we are blind to them. Someone in a group may see that characteristic and they can point it out to us. This is also where partnerships come in very good. Your partner will see your faults better than you. If you can sort of hold your words, bite your lips, bite your tongue, and ask them to tell you the worst things about yourself and take it, you will learn a lot. If you can send an email out to all your closest friends and family members saying, I want to discover the worst qualities about me, the things that I probably do not see, can you tell me? They will probably be able to fairly quickly identify your chief feature, your chief fault, and those corns that will make you feel so bad. And so you would only do this exercise if you had the strength and courage to look at yourself unflinchingly and not to take it back to them and get upset at them. People can see things about us, particularly when we are at the machine-like level operating with automatums and habits that we can't see, because by definition, when we are at that level, we are unable to observe ourselves. And when we step up into that mindful realm, the realm of personal consciousness, we're no longer machine-like in that moment. So it becomes pretty difficult to become aware of these characteristics within ourselves. This is where something like astrology comes in useful. It provides a sort of a starting point to begin to see how those different characteristics manifest themselves within us, to become a little less blind to these habitual subroutines within ourselves. To discover those things within ourselves to which we are attached, which we like and of which we are proud, although perhaps quite unconsciously, is the frequency of their repetition in outward manifestations, in dealings with other people. Such recurrent manifestations could be the first clue to our vanities. So here, when we're in that machine-like state, we do certain things over and over and over, more than others. This is why other people will be able to see them better than we do, because we're completely blind at that moment. But this is something else to watch out for. Those things, that we continually do habitually over and over, especially if we are overtly attached to them, even covertly attached to them. Any recurring manifestation, any unconscious habit is of necessity a form of blindness, in that the repetitive manifestations by its very operation prevents conscious activity. So if we're in the habitual state, we can't be personally conscious. So when these things are habitually manifesting themselves, this is preventing us from being at that level of conscious awareness. The need to produce constant struggle, also known as friction. Friction is the heat that melts all the disparate eyes and the disparate elements within ourselves and creates that unity within. And the only struggle is the struggle with ourselves, within ourselves, against ourselves. Struggling against other people in the world doesn't matter. It's the internal friction, that internal war. To watch for those things in oneself which one loves, whether they were emotional, physical, or mental manifestations, compulsions, habits, or characteristics. I loved being the peacemaker. I loved stepping between people and bringing them together. People who sometimes may notice on my Facebook feed, I get ornery and I try and poke people in the eyes, so to speak. That is so unnatural for me. And I can feel at times just a sense of emotion rising. And it makes me realize I've got to do it even more, to just poke, because that's not my natural characteristic. Now, this is what Mr. Gurdjieff said to Fritz Peters about that, using of astrology and astrological signs. But we live in a different world than Mr. Gurdjieff. We have other tools available to us. Oh, hey, Angelica, tudo bem? Let me come back here. So another one is the Myers-Briggs personality test. You can actually go online and you'll be given, a 10-minute series of questions. Don't think about the questions, just answer them as honestly as you can, more or less as habitually as you can. Just, quick, don't think about them too much. You want to see these underlying habitual structures that lie within yourself. And Myers-Briggs were a mother and daughter, and they based this on Jungian psychology, where Jung said there were 4 possibilities. But again, every stick has 2 ends. So, one of them, one of them is introvert, extrovert. When I took this test, first I took it, I think it was in 1984. I was an extreme introvert. I'm still an introvert. I love being by myself. I love quiet. I love solitude. But the last time I took this test, and the one that I did, ranked you on a continuum, and the test actually said that I was just on the side of extroversion. So it labeled me as an extrovert, but not an extreme extrovert, but a mild extrovert. And that was quite good for me, because I used to stutter. I had a speech impediment. I moved 25 times across 3 continents before the age of 5. I had extreme social anxiety. I was bullied up until grade 9. I had real problems talking to people, engaging in regular conversations. I would just get so hot and bothered and anxious, and my fight, flight, or freeze mechanism would spring to life when I met new people. And so I was an extreme introvert. This is a way that I've begun to balance my personality, to develop extrovert qualities. So you can do this test, and rather than go, I'm an IFPJ or whatever, you should be thinking of these as habitual parts of your nature against which you need to struggle against. So if you are an extrovert, spend a day alone. Don't talk to someone for a day. Grow used to silence. Grow used to being by yourself. If you can't stand being alone, develop the ability to be alone. If all you want to do is be alone, develop the ability to go out and talk to people and connect with people. Do the opposite. The next one is sensing and intuition. I will make this available, this presentation on the screen. I will put this with the YouTube channel so that you can go through it and look it up, but you can look up these tests online. So sensing, do you need concrete reality? How do you take in information, or are you intuitive? And another quadrant. Are you a thinking or feeling? Do you base your ideas on, do you work from the mind and reasonable, level-headed, or warmth and empathy coming from the feeling? This one's interesting because of the dimensions of the mind and the heart, and, the wrong work of the centers. And the fourth one is judging and perceiving. I was a P, heavily a P. And now, people say, isn't that a little judgmental of you? And, into my mind, I go, yes, it's working because I have striven to be a bit more judgmental and to express my judgmentalness. We think being judgmental is wrong, but if all you can do is perceive and not judge, you are a machine. You're stuck in that position. To free yourself, you want to be able to do both. You really want to be able to judge where it is appropriate to judge and perceive where it is appropriate to perceive. So going back to introversion and extroversion, I was an introvert at parties. I would find the biggest shadow and hang out there. It was inappropriate to be an introvert at a party. But at home, by myself, it's inappropriate to be an extrovert. So wherever we are, we want to have that freedom, that ability to choose and to be able to step between those. I've just brought up another one. This one is based on discourse analysis of human speech. It's the hexagon model of personality. 6 different types of personality dimensions, and it's really 12 because there's the positive and negative. And it's based on lexical hypothesis. So they analyzed the adjectives found in language, and they found 6 emergent factors. This comes from Wikipedia. Just Google top 10 personality tests, do a bunch of them. So honest, humility. So to be honest, to be humble, to be self-effacing and to do all of this. This is one characteristic. There's an opposite to this. Another characteristic is emotionality. Another one is extroversion. So the opposite of this one is introversion. The opposite of emotionality is more thought-based, more thinking-based. Agreeableness. So the opposite of this one is disagreeableness. To be disagreeable, to be contrarian. I had such a problem with that one. And so I go out of my way at times to be disagreeable and contrarian. Conscientious. The opposite of this is not to be conscientious, to be a little bit sloppy. Openness to experience or closed to experience. So I just, I just pulled that one this morning off the internet. I just Googled, top personality tests, and there's a website, top 10 personality tests. Try the Myers-Briggs, figure out where you are, try some of the others, recognizing that, like with that hexa test, whatever it is, each characteristic had an opposite, a polarity. And if all you can act is one way, there is no freedom in that. Freedom from those laws of personality that constrict us come in being able to do the opposite, come in being able to move to the center and achieve that state of balance. So we're all different. A lot of those personality tests, I would recommend trying to do them as quickly as possible without trying to analyze what they might be hoping to achieve from them. In other words, trying to be as habitual and mechanical as possible, and then to use them as a starting point. So if I'm an extreme introvert, how do I develop extroversion? If I'm an extreme perceiver, I watch what people are doing without judging them. How do I become more judgmental? How do I develop those opposite characteristics? And if we're particularly attached to one of those characteristics, we particularly love that feature about ourselves. I'm a perceiver. I'm a peacemaker. It's not my job to judge who's correct, but to bring people together and tone down the animosity. I was particularly attached to that quality. I love that about myself. So it was an important part for me to begin working on. There are a lot of memes on Facebook, Instagram of people loving their introversion and saying they're special and that introverts have these characteristics and they're this kind of person. And you can just see their love of that characteristic about themselves in the posts and in the memes that they've created and shared. As according to Fritz Peters, quoting Mr. Gurdjieff, those traits that we particularly admire about ourselves, that we particularly love about ourselves, are the places where we need to do some of the deepest works, because that is where our vanities, that's where Monsieur's self-love and Madame Vanity are located. So this is another reason why the Gurdjieff teachings, these teachings, do not take a cookie cutter approach to everyone. You do these 6 things and you do this and that. And, like a lot of other systems teach, it's very individual. Mr. Gurdjieff said there are 27 different personality types. So what applies to me doesn't apply to the other 26. So it's very much an individual thing. And as Fritz Peters emphasized there, you got to do this work for yourself. To expect someone to come in and say, oh, you're an extreme introvert, you've got to become more of an extrovert, is wrong. We've got to take the initiative and figure these things out for ourselves. We should not be dependent on other people, on gurus, on teachers, on people we surrender our authority to. We should take the authority back within ourselves and become the hardest taskmasters for ourselves. Find those parts of our personality that we absolutely adore, and then step on them and develop the opposite until we have that freedom. And then find out some of those other characteristics. Work through the 4 quadrants or the 6 possibilities or whatever of the different personality tests. Do not look at those personality tests as who you are. Look at them as how you develop the opposites. And this is one of the big problems I have with the Enneagram of personality. Besides it being a misrepresentation of the Enneagram, they say you are born a number 9 and you will live a number 9 and die a number 9, and it's who you are. And that is so fundamentally against what Mr. Gurdjieff taught. If you are a peacemaker, then you should try to create disharmony. You should try to develop the opposite quality within yourself. So if you understand yourself according to the personality of the Enneagram, figure out what all those characteristics are, and then work to develop the opposite. Just try to balance your being. Try to free yourself from as many laws as possible. So to have the freedom to say yes and no, the freedom to be a peacemaker or to bring strife, the freedom to act however we need to. And Mr. Gurdjieff talked about plastics and the ability to play different roles, not just the role of ourself, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, but to actually adopt different roles and to do them with absolute congruity. So to go out and be a grumpy person if you just want to smile and make everyone feel happy, and to do it so that no one knows you're playing a role, to become your opposite, to develop that flexibility of personality. So think about your astrological sign. Think about those qualities represented in the astrological sign that fit you. Think about those qualities about yourself that you're particularly attached to, that you are particularly in love with, where your vanity is, and begin to work against those. There is no general approach to everyone. And in this day and age, with all of these resources, taking these tests online, we can do so much of this work on our own. So I'm going to encourage you to, let's take this as a starting point for next week. Try to figure out some place, some habit, something about yourself that you love. You don't even necessarily have to begin work against it. Let's try perhaps to look at our astrological sign, or do the Myers-Briggs personality test, or that other one or another one, and come back next week and let's share some of our experiences. But we're out of time now. I'd like to thank you all for being here. Work on yourself. Figure out those vanity points, those things about yourself that you absolutely love, and how to shift that. Okay, thank you all for being here. And, next week, take care. Bye now.
Thank you, Allan.
Thank you.